The father the entire family believed had been dead for 17 years suddenly walked into his daughter's engagement party. He did not bring flowers. He did not bring an apology. He simply placed an old wooden box on the table and spoke a sentence that left the entire room frozen in silence. "If you knew why I disappeared, you would never look at your mother the same way again." The banquet hall fell completely silent. Emily Carter stood among rows of white flowers, her engagement ring still sparkling on her finger. She had grown up believing one story and one story only, that her father, Thomas Carter, was a selfish man who had abandoned his wife and daughter in pursuit of another life. For 17 years, Emily hated him. For 17 years, her mother, Margaret, cried in front of everyone and told the story of a woman who had been betrayed. But that night, when Thomas returned with silver hair, tired eyes, and a secret buried for far too long, everything Emily had ever believed began to fall apart. 17 years earlier, Thomas Carter had left home on a cold November morning. Emily was only 12 years old at the time. She still remembered the sound of the door closing, her father's brown coat, and the way he turned back to look at her a little longer than usual. He had said, "You have to stay strong, no matter what happens in the future." Emily did not understand. By that evening, Thomas had not returned. 3 days later, the police found his car beside a riverside road. There was no one inside. Only his wallet, his phone, and several dried bloodstains on the driver's seat. From that day on, Margaret became the tragic mother in the eyes of the entire town. She raised Emily alone, answered difficult questions alone, and endured endless rumors alone. At least, that was what everyone believed. And Emily believed it too. She loved her mother. She hated her father. Whenever someone mentioned Thomas, Emily would quietly walk away. To her, the man had not simply disappeared, he had betrayed the entire family. Years passed. Emily became a successful attorney. She was preparing to marry Daniel, a kind, calm man who loved her deeply. The engagement celebration was held in the garden behind the Carter family estate. Margaret appeared in a dark blue dress, wearing a proud smile. She raised her glass to congratulate her daughter. She told everyone that Emily was the most precious thing in her life. The guests were moved. Emily was too. But just as Margaret finished her speech, the iron gate at the back suddenly opened. An older man stepped inside. At first, no one recognized him. Then the glass slipped from Margaret's hand and shattered against the stone floor. "Thomas." The name escaped her lips like an old wound being torn open. Emily turned around. Her heart nearly stopped. The man standing before her looked much older than the last photograph she had ever seen of him, but those eyes were unforgettable. It was her father. The father who had vanished. The father she had silently cursed for 17 years. Thomas did not walk forward to embrace Emily. He remained several steps away, as if he knew he no longer had the right. He placed the wooden box on the table. His voice was rough. "I didn't come back to ruin your special day. I came back because if I stayed silent any longer, you would get married without ever knowing the truth about your own family." Margaret immediately stepped forward. She shouted that he was a liar. She said he had abandoned his wife and daughter. She said he had no right to be there. But Thomas only looked at her with sadness in his eyes. Then he opened the box. Inside were stacks of old letters, an audio cassette, and a faded medical file. Emily's hands trembled as she picked up the first letter. It was her father's handwriting. But the recipient was not Margaret. The recipient was Emily. The letters stretched across 17 years. One letter every year. One letter for every birthday. One letter for every Christmas. Emily struggled to breathe. She had never received a single one. Thomas looked at his daughter, his eyes red with emotion. "I wrote to you every year. I sent money every month. But everything was either returned or disappeared." The entire garden fell silent. Margaret's face turned pale. Emily looked at her mother. "Did you know about these letters?" Margaret did not answer. Her silence was the first answer. Thomas pulled out the second file. He explained that before he disappeared, he had discovered that Margaret had secretly taken money from Emily's education fund to invest in a failed real estate project. Not only that, she had forged his signature on multiple loan documents. When Thomas planned to take the matter to the authorities, Margaret begged him to stay quiet because Emily was still too young. He agreed to give her time to make things right. But shortly afterward, He was attacked on his way home. The car found by the river had not been an accident. It had been a warning. Thomas survived, but he was forced to leave because the people behind Margaret's debts threatened to harm Emily if he returned. He accepted disappearing. He accepted being hated by his daughter. As long as Emily remained safe, Emily took a step backward. Everything inside her shattered. The mother she had always seen as the victim might have been the person who started it all. Margaret burst into tears. She said Thomas was making everything up. She said he wanted to destroy her reputation. But Thomas did not argue. He simply placed the cassette into a small recorder. A crackling sound filled the air. Then a much younger version of Margaret's voice emerged. "If you disappear, people will feel sorry for me. Emily will belong to me. No one believes a man who abandons his family." Emily stood frozen. Thomas's voice echoed from the recording, filled with pain and exhaustion. "Margaret, you can't use our daughter to hide your mistakes." Then Margaret laughed. "Who do you think is going to believe you?" The recording ended. No one spoke. Daniel gently took Emily's hand, but she barely felt it. She looked at her mother, the woman who had held her every night when she cried for her father, the woman who repeatedly told her that her father was cruel. That woman now stood before her with no explanation strong enough to defend herself. Emily thought the truth had finally ended there, but Thomas still had one final document. He handed her a white envelope. Inside were DNA test results. Emily frowned. "What are you talking about?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment. His voice nearly broke. "You are my daughter, that has never changed. But I'm not the only person Margaret deceived." Emily opened the report. Another man's name appeared. Richard Hale. A wealthy businessman who had once been a close friend of the Carter family. Margaret collapsed into a chair. Thomas spoke slowly. "Richard is your biological father. But when he discovered that Margaret had been using him for money, she cut off all contact. I learned the truth when you were 3 years old, but I chose to stay, because to me, you were never a secret. You were my daughter." Emily broke down in tears, not because of the betrayal hidden in her bloodline, but because the man she had hated for 17 years was the only person who had chosen to love her when he never had to. Margaret struggled to stand. She reached her hand toward Emily. "Please listen to me." But Emily stepped back, not because of hatred, but because, for the first time in her life, she no longer knew who the woman standing before her truly was. Thomas did not ask for forgiveness. He only said, "I don't expect you to call me Dad today. I only want you to know that you were never abandoned." Those words made Emily sob uncontrollably. For years, she believed she was the child her father had left behind. But the truth was that she had been trapped inside a lie, told by the person she trusted most. Daniel stepped forward and gently informed the guests that the celebration needed to end. One by one, people left the garden in silence. There was no more music, no more congratulations. Only a family standing in the ruins of secrets buried for far too long. 3 months later, Emily met Thomas again at a small riverside cafe. She brought every letter he had ever written. She had read them all, every line, every delayed birthday wish, every apology he never had the chance to say in person. Emily sat down across from him. A long silence passed. Then she quietly said, "I still don't know how to forgive." Thomas nodded. He did not pressure her. But Emily continued, "Yet I want to start by hearing the truth from you." Thomas began to cry, not because everything had been healed, but because after 17 years, the first door had finally opened. Some families do not fall apart because someone leaves. Some families fall apart because someone stays, only to hide the truth. And sometimes, the person branded as the betrayer is the one who made the greatest sacrifice in silence. If you were Emily, could you forgive a mother who lied to you for 17 years? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional family drama, Reddit stories, Reddit family drama story content, and dramatic storytelling you won't soon forget. We'll see you in the next story.